given that it uses code that you've already written for previous homeworks, and it involves some. Yes.
I think there's an R missing in the first question.
That's most likely you're right.
Right? There should be an R.
Okay. Send me an email. Send it
I'll
here.
put it on Canvas.
I'll check it out. Okay.
And the features are not in sparse format.
The features for the experiment,
Yes.
that was deliberate.
But you have written in this that they are in sparse format.
Okay. They are not in sparse format, and that was deliberate mostly to break your code so that it will become more robust. Other questions?
So does it have to work on sparse data?
What does?
Our code?
No, it doesn't matter.
It's just in that format with
The linear format.
yeah.
You can use whatever internal data structure works best for you. I really don't want to see the insides of your code unless it breaks.
Well, I was just ignoring the first part and just reading in the value, which works if it's not sparse data.
Yes. Yes.
So that's a safe assumption.
So you have something that looks like feature ID : feature value, right? In general, the linear format, the feature value can be a real number. So you should be able to parse it. And what you do with it is, of course, you can store it in a sparse data structure, but you should be able to read the thing. In the wild, once you're out of the class, you probably will not be reading that because you probably might end up using linear. But you might end up having to create data that fits linear. So it's good to just keep it in mind. Another couple of again, informal announcements. Next semester there's going to be an optimization class in the math department, and a lot of you might have noticed that much of machine learning can be written, many learning algorithms can be written as optimization problems, and if you're interested in learning about this, you might want to sign up for that class. And the final plug for a seminar that I'll be conducting next semester, this will be on deep learning. And the plan is for it to be fun, but we'll see.
There could be data mining seminars.
I'm trying to rebrand it as a machine learning seminar for the next semester. I think registration is not yet open. It might be open sometime next week or something. You probably know that better than me. Alright, so what have we seen so far? This is not what I have on my slides at all. Oh, that's probably right. Yes. So what have we seen so far? For the first half of the semester, we've been trying to answer this question of what is learning? What does learning mean? How do you quantify learnability? And we've looked at two big styles of analyzing learning. The first one, we called it mistake-driven learning, which says, I consider an algorithm to have learned if it stops making mistakes on new data, on a stream of data. And this gives us algorithms like perceptron, Winnow, and we saw some theoretical constructions like the halving algorithm. And then we spent a large chunk of our time on pack learning. And pack learning is really trying to answer the question, if you're given a finite data set, how can you quantify the performance of a classifier on a future example? What's the probability that you'll make a mistake? Or what's the probability of error, and how many examples do you need to do well in future? Now, under both these criteria, we looked at various learning algorithms, because many times just looking at this criteria and defining it naturally leads to a learning algorithm. For example, like the support vector machine. And these learning algorithms, basically, the general interface is you're given an input x, and it's a deterministic function. Once learning is done, it's a deterministic function that produces a label. That's been the story of the semester so far, and today, actually for the rest of the semester in fact, we'll be looking at a third way of analyzing learning. A third way of answering the question, what does it mean to learn? And this is called Bayesian learning. And under this umbrella, we look at, to start off, we look at two algorithms, naive Bayes and logistic regression, but more generally, we look at this criterion and formalize this into criteria for defining what is learning. So today, my plan is to start with that first part. In fact, the plan is to start off by defining Bayesian learning and in particular define the maximum a posteriori and maximum likelihood criterion. And if you've done statistics before, or if you've taken some version of this machine learning before, you've probably seen these things. And my preference is eventually, not today, but over the course of maybe the next few weeks, point out that even though these learning criteria start off by they look so different from what we've seen so far, end of the day, they end up being optimization problems again, and they end up fitting under this loss minimization kind of regime. And that's probably where we want to get to at the end of, by the end of next week. Today, after defining these criteria, I'll walk through two examples which use these for learning in the context of a binomial distribution and the normal distribution. And I'll talk about the Bayes optimal classifier, which is this idealized best thing that we can do ever. Unfortunately, like everything that's idealized, it doesn't exist. And my plan is to start off with the intuition behind naive Bayes. Most likely we'll run out of time by that when we get to that, and we'll pick up on naive Bayes in the next lecture. So let's start with Bayesian learning. In general, when people say probabilistic learning, there are typically two things that come under this umbrella. The first one is we learn a function. To learn probabilistic functions, what that means is we have a concept class which is a set of all functions from inputs, instances x, to 0 to 1, the range. We find this function, and then eventually we interpret the output of this function as a probability, and we can use this function. Basically, it turns out if you want to learn these kinds of probabilistic concepts, this kind of analysis that we've done so far is roughly sufficient. We can analyze these kinds of algorithms, and I'm not going to talk about this, and I encourage you to think about it. Kind of the language of analysis that we've used so far is somewhat sufficient to analyze these kinds of numbers. Another thing that people mean when you say probabilistic learning is the idea of Bayesian learning, which is, remember that learning is about selecting a hypothesis. You're given a hypothesis set and we want to find one function that is good enough. Bayesian learning is a probabilistic criterion that defines this selection. So the hypothesis itself can be a deterministic function. It's the choice of hypothesis that is made using a probabilistic intuition. So I'm going to repeat this point multiple times through multiple slides because I want it to kind of sink in. The general idea is we want to define some notion of what is the best hypothesis. And the standard setting is that you have some observed data, and due to an unfortunate, well, I guess I would say mix-up, I've occasionally used D to define data sets. Like before, we've used S to define data sets, and from the context, it must be pretty clear. So you're given some data set D, and we want to find a function in a hypothesis space H that is the best one. And we define best as the most probable hypothesis. And I'll talk about this for quite a bit. In order to quantify this idea of most probable hypothesis, you need to have some assumption about probability distributions over the hypothesis space. Because only when you have probability distributions over the hypothesis space can you pick the most probable one. And that's pretty much all that's the game here. You want to understand what's the most probable hypothesis, so we try to find the most, we try to define the probability distribution over the hypothesis, but this probability distribution has to be somehow connected to the data. Because otherwise you're doing nothing, there's no learning, so you can just pick one. So we want, there are two different aspects here. Some distribution over the hypothesis which exists independent of anything, and then how this distribution over the hypothesis space changes once data comes in. And basically the whole of maybe the next half an hour, I'll be expanding on this idea. But before we get to that, I just want to make some promises about how cool this is. Just like the other criteria for learning algorithms, for defining learning, Bayesian analysis gives us new learning algorithms, because we've not had enough so far. Which means it also gives me new ways of making homework questions. But one very cool thing that Bayesian analysis gives us is a way of introducing, in a rigorous way, our prior beliefs about the model and encode that in our learning criteria. And of course, it provides a framework for analyzing learning, because it's one of those three different ways of analyzing learning, and all these good things. But before we get on to this, we need
Last time when you said that we can inject domain knowledge,
Yes.
is this what?
Yes, yes. Before we get on to that, I've been talking about probabilities and stuff, but let's go back to third grade now and talk about things that we've learned many, many centuries back.
So, comparing this way of thinking to the first half of the semester, the notion of error that we had before for the algorithms, here it is converted to the probability
Yes.
of choosing them.
It is defined.
It can be mapped.
Oh, it can be mapped. In fact, that's the fun thing that will happen maybe next Monday, where I'll point out that logistic regression comes from this rigorous probabilistic assumption, and applying the criterion that I'm going to define now very soon, the maximum likelihood or maximum a posteriori, to logistic regression, it ends up being basically loss minimization, but with a specific loss. It ends up defining a different loss function. Now, clearly this also has something to do with my outlook in life, the way I'm defining it. One might argue that the probabilistic version of the story is the truth, and everything else, even the different loss version, loss minimization, can be folded into the probabilistic story. Basically, they are roughly similar, except they tweak the way you define the idea of what's a mistake or what is a good hypothesis. Other questions? Okay, so nothing on this slide must be surprising for you. If it is, I encourage you to go back and look at some probability refreshers. This is the Bayes theorem, goes back to Ramirez and Bayes, and the idea is there are let's say two sets of random variables, x and y, and you want to relate the probability of observing y, of probability of y when you've observed x, to the probability of x when you've observed y. And the easy answer is that they're proportional. But let me just introduce some terminology that you may or may not have seen before. If you have some y, and here I'm not using the standard notation that we've been following so far of x being inputs and y being outputs. This is just random variables, x and y. If you have some y, I'm going to call p of y as the prior. Tells us what's our prior belief that y is true, that if y is a Boolean. What's our prior belief that in y before we see any x? P of x given y is the likelihood. says what is the likelihood of observing X for a particular Y. And P of Y given X is called the posterior. It's the posterior distribution. What is the probability of observing the Y having seen this particular X? And there's a normalizing constant P of X at the bottom. The message on this slide is simply that the posterior distribution is proportional to the likelihood times the prior.
Can you give us the intuition about why that is called prior and why is it posterior?
The P of Y is called the prior because it summarizes all your assumptions about the data. Typically Y can be seen as a label, for example, or Y can be seen as a hypothesis. If Y is a hypothesis, then P of H, in that case, the hypothesis H, would be what is your prior belief about the hypothesis. We'll come to this because I'm going to instantiate this specifically for learning. So the prior encodes what you know, what you believe about that output, and the likelihood tells you how is that given a particular output, what's the likelihood of observing a particular observation, and the posterior is the scaled version of the prior effectively. Having seen this, how would you change your belief on Y? So the prior is before observing any X, the posterior is after observing X. So continuing this thread about probability refresher, again, this is stuff that you've probably all seen before. The product rule for probability is probability of A and B, probability of A given B times probability of B. The sum says probability of A or B is probability of A plus probability of B minus probability of A and B. And I'm rushing through this because I know you've seen this and I don't want to put you to sleep. This is an important thing that's worth recollecting. The idea of conditional independence, or in this case independence, A and B are independent if probability of A and B is probability of A times probability of B, and this is an if and only if condition. And in any case, so there are other standard axioms for probability, and you can look these up on your own time. Let's get back to Bayesian learning. So what I mentioned before is we want to develop a criterion for what is the best hypothesis given a data set. And we are going to appeal to the Bayes rule to help us build this condition. So remember that now we are thinking of our hypotheses as random variables. Our data set is another random variable. Then we can say there's a prior. Prior probability of a hypothesis encodes our background knowledge. It tells us what do we believe the hypothesis to be. If we know nothing about the hypothesis, then the most reasonable thing to do would be to assume the uniform distribution. I know nothing, so the prior should be uniform. Now, the data set is, at this point, let's say we have a data set, or one example. The likelihood is, suppose you pick a particular hypothesis H, what's the likelihood that this data set was generated by that function? It's possible that some hypothesis will never generate a certain data set. And it's possible that some hypothesis will only generate certain data sets, and this encodes that belief. Our posterior is what is the probability that H is the hypothesis having observed a certain data set. Notice that this is the interesting part here. We typically in life we are given a data set, not hypotheses. So we are given a data set and we want to find a function that best explains the data. And by best we are asking most probable. And by definition that is the posterior. Given a data set, what is the probability of a hypothesis function? And the Bayes rule lets us flip these two things apart in terms of the prior and the likelihood. And there's this normalizer, the P of D, which is really what's the probability that a data set is observed. Who can tell me why this is not interesting? This last box.
So now we're saying whatever yours.
I don't know anything.
So I heard many answers. Let's have one brave person lift their hand up. Yes.
Should be the same for every data
Is it the same for it? Why should it be the same for every data set?
set. Data set is equally likely.
Is it? Think about it. We always assume that we have a fixed and unknown distribution over data.
It's a constant.
It's a constant. We only care about the hypothesis functions. If we want to maximize this term over all hypotheses, it doesn't matter what this is. The denominator disappears when we maximize. And that's convenient because otherwise we'll have to sum over all hypotheses to get that denominator, which is going to kill us computationally. Not that we are in the clear yet, but at least there's some hope. So, I've already given away the secret here. The most probable hypothesis, yes,
Even P of X has to be constant.
P of X doesn't have to be constant because think about it this way. Okay, you know what? Let me get through this one thing. In fact, let me get through this, and then we'll get back to your question. Okay? P of X, the short answer is it doesn't have to be constant because it reflects your prior belief over hypothesis. In practice, very often it ends up being constant, but not always. And in fact, not making it constant has the same benefits as regularization, and we'll derive that. Yeah.
I mean, on this point, in the starting it's constant because they are giving equal distribution, right?
Say that again.
The starting P of X will be constant.
It
for the
doesn't
same-
have to be. It's not unreasonable often to assume that it's constant, but it doesn't have to be. And mathematically, it's not right. It's not yet fully correct to assume it's constant. We'll very quickly make an assumption that it's constant and move on, but I'll point out why it's not always. So, the maximum a posteriori hypothesis or map hypothesis is simply the maximum. It's basically the definition is in the name. It's the hypothesis that maximizes the posterior distribution. And we've just seen that the posterior distribution, just apply Bayes' rule and you get this whole thing, and this expression here needs to be maximized to find the map hypothesis. The map hypothesis is that function h. Remember that h is still a function. H is a function that takes x to y. Yep.
Can you say that P of H encodes our knowledge about the context?
It encodes our belief about what kinds of functions are possible.
What kinds of functions or what?
Are possible.
So this is our knowledge about the context. So when we believe that some functions should be more probable than others, it means that we have a knowledge about the context that we are in. So
Yes, that's when you say context, you mean the broader context in which the algorithm is used.
Yeah.
Yeah. It encodes background knowledge effectively, and this is such a hard task that we often end up doing basically one of three things. Always, you assume that you assume a uniform distribution or a normal or something like that. It's very often very simplistic, but this must tell you why I cannot assume that I cannot erase P of H, because this maximization is over the product, and P of H is in the product. You can't just get rid of it because it's there. So that
let's say we have a Boolean function,
right?
and I know that this is a conjunction, not a disjunction.
Uh-huh.
Should I give more probability to a conjunction?
If you know that this is a conjunction, then
My
what you
hypothesis space is all Boolean functions.
then what you could do is give zero probability to all other functions.
And one to this conjunction.
Not one, but 1 divided by the number of conjunctions. The probabilities need to add up to 1.
Yeah, that's right. If everything is zero, then there should be one, right?
Not one. It's 1 over. It's a the sum of all these things should add up to 1.
And you
So
said-
it's uniform.
So you said everything is 0.
Everything else is 0. And how many conjunctions are
How
there?
many connections are there? Then 1 by
Yes.
okay, yeah.
You could do that.
It is not the probability of that hypothesis. It's the probability of hypothesis giving a particular label.
No, P of x is just that the probability of that hypothesis existing. Because there's nothing about the labeling there.
But in Bayesian, the formulation we just saw, we had like particular values of y and particular values of x in that rule, right?
Yeah.
And
So this is shorthand for
oh, and we say our label is p of h of t, h of
h of x, if you want.
h of x.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as we move on, do we change this thing? Right.
As you move
As
on.
we see the data set more and more, we
The only part of this that is defined by the data set is P of D given h.
yes.
So the likelihood will change as you see more data. The prior, in an ideal world, should not. In practice, what happens is that prior also changes because you start understanding your domain better. But that's really kind of fitting the background knowledge to the task.
So in a sense, what we are doing on our training data, we are applying multiple hypotheses, and
Yep.
we are doing this product too.
Yep, yep. You're trying out different hypotheses and finding which is the best one according to this criteria. Questions? And I just want to remind you that the posterior is, as always, product of the likelihood and the prior. The likelihood is that part of this product that brings in information about the data. The prior is that part of this product that you bring from home before you see data. And this is not just made up, it has this nice formal derivation for why this is a reasonable thing to do. But as many of you observed, very often it's a reasonable assumption, it's a convenient assumption, let's say, to assume that all hypotheses are equally likely. So you make a uniform prior over the hypothesis, and this gives us another condition for finding the best, defining what is the best hypothesis. This is called the maximum likelihood principle. Yep. Can you speak up? Sorry.
H-map constant or a hypothesis?
H-map is a function. It's a hypothesis. H is always a hypothesis.
You are defining it as a product of probabilities.
It's R max. It's not max. It's R max.
Yes, but still it is a product of probabilities.
No, the R max is a function. The max is a product of probabilities. The R max is the maximizer. That function which achieves the maximum. Make sense? Other questions? So the maximum likelihood estimate is extremely common, and the idea is simply I want to find that hypothesis which makes the data set most likely, because the hypothesis produces data, and I'm going to search over all hypotheses and find the one that seems to maximize the likelihood of whatever you observed. And when you see maximum likelihood estimation, the implicit assumption is that there's a uniform prior over the hypothesis class. Yep.
But what about the noise? I mean, if you lead to overfitting?
The noise can be,
Because if you get the argmax over the data set, then we will overfit.
the noise is actually taken care of here, and I'll walk through an example which will basically you model the noise. there are ways of modeling the noise into this.
So this, how can we say when it is overfitting? So we have more maximum value, the more it is overfitting, right?
So there are here. What is overfitting? Overfitting is when your hypothesis explains the data really well, but it doesn't generalize, right? And what that means is that could typically, in this case, overfitting ends up happening when you have very little data. When your hypothesis space is very complex, when you have a set of functions that can pretty much generate anything, you will generate anything, and so you will overfit. And it intuitively, overfitting, the analysis of overfitting in this regime is exactly the same as what we have done before. If your hypothesis has way too many parameters, you will end up overfitting your data. And we will explore this a little bit more once we come to concrete instantiations of this D and H. And just as a computational point, typically maximizing probabilities is not easy, but maximizing log probabilities is easy. And we will see an example of this very soon. But here's a terrible, terrible algorithm, just to give you an intuition for how you could employ map estimation. The brute force map learner, which if any of you try to implement, I'll be ashamed. What you do is you iterate over every hypothesis in your hypothesis set and compute that probability given your data. Now you have a list of functions and a probability, and you find the maximum. Any algorithm that we care about should conceptually be the same as this. Computationally, it should not be the same as this except in the most trivial cases. Okay, to get the general idea of maximum a posteriori learning. Questions about this? Okay, keep your questions, and maybe you'll see them after, you'll get more questions after we see some examples. So, in fact, I'm not going to give you examples of map estimation, because we'll come to that probably once we talk about logistic regression. I want to give you examples of maximum likelihood estimation, where you want to find R max of probability of data given a hypothesis. So, effectively, what we need is an assumption that drives all this. We need to assume how the data is generated given the hypothesis, or we need to assume how the data is, what's the probability. We need a functional form for that expression then. Only then can we do any maximization. So we need a hypothesis space and a model. This assumption about the functional form of the probability is called the model. So I'm going to give you an example which deals with binomial distribution starting. And this is just some contrived example. Let's say there's a startup, and after this class you decide to go and become a machine learning consultant. And this company, what does it do? It makes glass beads, and they want to identify what's the probability that a bead will shatter when it's dropped from a certain height. And since you know everything about machine learning and statistics, you say, yes, of course, I can do that. Are the beads all identical? And yeah, of course. So now we need to go out and collect data. So what you do is you drop 5 beads, and 3 of them break and 2 of them don't. And you say the probability of failure is 0.6. How many people say that would agree with that statement? Some shy hands are going up. How many people disagree? Why?
You can be pretty sure that that's not the exact probability. You need more data.
We need more data.
But sampling may not be accurate.
Okay, you guys are jumping ahead. But, even before that, is that number correct? If let's say there are only 5 beads in the universe, is that number correct? Is 0.6? How did you get it?
Now there's only 2 beats, so no.
Huh?
There was only 2 B's left, so now.
Fair enough, yeah, sure. So, how do you get, those of you who said they agree with me, why do you agree with me? Why is it 0.6?
Here's 3 out of the 5 B's broken.
Why did you divide 3 by 5? What was the principle that you used?
Something that I learned in like 3rd grade.
3rd grade, yeah, exactly. It all goes, everything, machine learning is all 3rd grade, I tell you. Calculus, probabilities, basically all of it is 3rd grade. Here's an argument I'm going to make. What you have implicitly done is you assume that the probability of failure follows the binomial distribution. A binomial distribution, just to is just a scary word for a coin toss. So you assume that the probability of failure is P. And I think the probability of success is 1 minus P. Now every trial is independent but identically distributed. So every bead has the same probability of shattering. We've observed 3 beads shatter and 2 do not. So the probability of the data given the hypothesis. No, wait, what's the hypothesis here?
20 feet.
Sorry?
The 20 feet thing, the glass.
No, there are no 20 beats. That's 20 feet.
20 feet, yeah. That's
No, the hypothesis about this decision function, whether a particular
P as the
This is the hypothesis.
P is the hypothesis. The hypothesis includes 2 things, in fact. The hypothesis is that your data is generated by the binomial distribution and they're all IID. If that is the case, the probability of D given H is simply the product of probability of each data point. I'm going to use small d for every data point, break or not. Right? Now, you have 5 of these things. They're all independent. So it lets you do this, split up this probability, and that gives us p cubed 1 minus p squared. That's nice. So effectively what we have is a functional form for the likelihood of the data having given this a particular hypothesis, the hypothesis that the bias of this coin is p. So what's the most likely value for the, how do you compute the most likely value? What we want, by the way, is to maximize this term. What we want is to maximize the data given your hypothesis. In other words, find the p that gives you the maximum likelihood. So, how do you maximize this? Yeah. Take the derivative. Is there an easier way? Almost right, but
No,
take the log.
negative.
So, typically, in many cases, instead of taking the derivative of the likelihood directly, it's more convenient to take the derivative of the log likelihood. Because, let me illustrate that here. So we had probability of data given the hypothesis is p times p cubed times 1 minus p squared. The log likelihood, I'm just going to call it LL, is and now calculus becomes a lot more easy. You can just take the derivative of this, and I'm not going to work through this example. In fact, it doesn't have to be 3 and 2, it can be A and B for any AB. And that only changes these 2 numbers. And it turns out, if you take the derivative of this and set it to 0, what you get is the best probability is b divided by a plus b. And this is basically one line of calculus. And that is why you picked 0.6. So this is, it turns out, by just doing that naive computation that you learned in 3rd grade, you were actually being a maximum likelihood estimator. You were the learning algorithm here. Questions?
We were learning on the inaccurate hypothesis, right? We were just assuming that those 5 walls which we have taken over the universe, which is wrong.
Which is wrong. Now, one way of correcting for that, how do you correct for that? That's a good question. How do you correct for that?
Have more.
Suppose this is the only data you have. Let's say these are diamond beads and you can't buy more than 5. In which case you shouldn't be dropping them, but that's a different question. But how do you correct for that? And let me give you a hint. There is something in this space of solutions that lets you correct for that. That lets you introduce background knowledge.
Is it related to confidence interval?
No, the prior. The prior effectively says, I don't really want to make too many, I don't want to do too many experiments, I don't want too much data because this is what I believe about P, about the hypothesis. Let me just use the data to kind of guide my hypothesis to the right spot, but I don't want too much data. So the prior is a way of compensating.
We get prior from the data itself.
No, the prior is your prior belief. In this case, you have to make an assumption that this data, in the absence of any data, this is what your.
In this example, the prior information would be knowing that all the beads are identical.
In this case, the prior information is that the prior is actually a probability distribution over H. In other words, it's a probability distribution over the P. So that's where conjugate priors come in, and you can put priors on top of priors on top of priors, and that's how you get jokes about variations. But the point is, in this case, the prior distribution is that P equals half. I'm sorry.
0.3 and 0.2.
Hmm?
0.3 and 0.2.
What is 0.3 and 0.2?
That probability of dropping and not breaking and not breaking.
Are half. Probability of success and failure are both equal. You assume a fair coin. The prior in maximum likelihood is the uniform prior. So here what we implicitly assume is that this is all the data we have and this is what we are going to do. And if you do not believe that, you will add more knowledge. Effectively what that will end up doing is, in this case, the prior for the binomial, the right thing is the beta distribution that basically gives you P equals effectively it adds constants to this. In the absence of any data, this will be 1 over 2, which is half. In the presence of data, if you have tons and tons of data, the prior will disappear because they are no longer meaningful. They no longer contribute to the sum. Yeah.
So can the prior act sort of like a hyperparameter?
The prior is typically a function that comes with its own hyperparameters. It's built in. So one example of prior, and in fact I didn't want to mention this, but since there are so many questions, it turns out if you assume that in linear classifiers, if you assume that your weight vector comes from a normal distribution in the n-dimensional space, okay, centered at the origin, that is exactly, it gives you the same function when you take the log likelihood or the log posterior, that gives you basically the norm. And that's the probabilistic interpretation of maximizing the margin. And I'm going to work through that in gory detail at the end of next lecture. Yeah.
Isn't it like a cheating because prior is something we are reducing from entire data.
It's not from the data.
It's
The-
a more strong assumption. It's
No, no.
not the hypothesis.
The prior is not the prior is not being reduced from the data. The prior is being reduced as part of your modeling assumption. The prior is something that you, before having seen even a single example, believe about the hypothesis
So
space.
instead of data, it's more an assumption and problem. rather
It's
than-
the assumption about the problem.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's a very strong assumption.
It can be a very strong assumption. Yeah. So typically, what it increases the bias of the learner and reduces variance.
Yeah, but if we have that strong bias already, we know that we know a lot about the problem.
Yeah, you typically don't make very strong biases. You downweight the prior a bit.
So here we see that it doesn't really depend upon the probability, right?
What?
This one, the P best,
Uh-huh.
depends upon the like successes and losses over the data, right?
Yeah, the A and B here.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't depend upon the prior
Here I've assumed that the prior is actually uniform.
uniform.
Yeah.
So
Here it's the prior makes no difference.
yeah, so for our case, like for this example itself, let's assume that it's not uniform distributed. So we'll choose all set of probabilities and we'll assign all set of probabilities to our hypothesis and then we'll move on, is it?
Can you say that slower? Sorry.
So I'm saying, so I'm asking in our example, what are the set of hypotheses we can choose for? Just to give a fair
In this particular example,
Yeah.
it's the set of all probabilities P
right?
from
P
0 to 1.
0 to 1,
Yes.
anything. So
Yes.
in case of it, if it is not a uniform distributed thing, so it will be a hell lot of calculations, right?
It will be a hell lot of calculations, but it turns out that if you make a reasonably clever assumption about the prior, what will happen is that becomes a term here. Typically, the usual prior on this looks like probability of H equals B equals P power beta and 1 minus P power 1 minus beta. So you parameterize by a single number. And then you multiply this with this, and everything works out. You can just do calculus again. So you multiply probability of H times probability of B given H. So you want to, let me use another color for this. So I want to multiply this expression and this expression.
How do you choose that constant?
Which one? This constant?
Yeah.
It's a hyperparameter. This is where the jokes start coming in. One is I could put a prior on that, but that's an unfortunate, that's a dangerous part. The other one is cross-validation. So when I multiply these two terms, obviously what it means is that A gets an additional beta, B gets a 1 minus beta, and
We have rounded up, we have taken the probability out of the picture itself.
we've taken the probability out of the picture, and then you can just use becomes or something like that. Or typically there might be two numbers here, alpha and beta, so you get alpha plus beta.
We are not giving importance to any hypothesis, right?
No, you are. What this means is that you like certain P more than the others.
So this beta, right? We give each probability the same beta or a different?
Oh, so this is,
This is a hypothesis.
these are fixed.
All the H's.
Sorry?
No, I was saying that this beta and alpha is the distribution of all of the H's.
Yes, it's the distribution over all hypotheses.
So, is it kind of a fair assumption about when you don't have any kind of prior knowledge about the distribution of something? Normally we assume a uniform distribution, but I want to know from where this beta distribution comes out. So, how it looks like? Is it like a bell shape? What's that?
Oh, it's you have to look it up on Wikipedia because for different alpha and beta, it gives you different curves. Because
So why is it a fair assumption?
why is it a fair assumption? Because, now this is a good question. The beta distribution is the conjugate prior of the binomial. The only reason this is used is because multiplying these two is mathematically convenient. Again, this is one of those places where you solve a problem that you know how to solve rather than the one that you want to solve. The math works out easier, that's the answer. It's convenient, and just don't tell the Bayesians if you meet them that
but
they don't make so much of a difference. You didn't hear it from me. It's recorded, but you didn't hear it from me. The one thing that I want to again remind you is that we've made a very strong assumption here. We've assumed that this model is binomial. We could assume a different model. There are many probability distributions over Booleans. The binomial is convenient because the math fits on one board. But you could assume other distributions. But the interesting thing is, I never mentioned binomial, and yet most of you agreed that the probability was 0.6.
Well, I guess we cannot just choose any kind of distribution. Here we are doing an experiment, and the distribution that is...
Yeah, here it's fairly obvious, but in some cases, again, the mathematical convenience trumps what might be the most obvious thing. Sometimes more than one thing might be reasonable. So it's entirely possible that you might not have the best motivations for choosing a certain distribution.
Yeah, it's like, for example, when you want to calculate if the beads are going to break or not, you choose to kind of...
I could have tried to extract some attributes from those beads and said that the probability distribution is maybe the logistic function, and that will give me a totally different model. I could still do maximum likelihood estimation on that. It will give me a different model. Okay, let's move on. This is about half an hour slower than the way I wanted to go. But that's okay. I mean, the point is, this is a different style of thinking about learning, and I don't mind. The point is not to get to the end of the lecture. I actually want this to sink in. So let's look at another example. This time, say, we are in this familiar territory of having to classify points in n-dimensional spaces. So our inputs are x, are real valued vectors, and the output, actually in this case, it's not, let's say, not classification, it's a real number. So we want to, given a point x, we want to predict some number y. And typically, in probabilistic modeling, you come up with something called the generative story, the story of the data. What's the process that produced the data? And in this case, I'm going to assume that the data is generated, every training example is independently generated in the following way. Some input xi is drawn, I don't care how. It's a vector in the n-dimensional space, and there is this true function f that's applied to it. I don't know the true function. Then f of xi is perturbed by some noise. This noise, I'll call it ei, and that's the observation that you make. The true function f of xi plus the perturbation, that's your yi. And so we get m training examples of points and this perturbed outputs. This is the generative story of the data. Now the thing about the noise is that we are assuming, in this case, that the noise is Gaussian, meaning it will never be too far from the center, and it has a zero meaning. The center is the origin. What that means is this yi will never be too far from the f of xi. This is the story of the data. Now this story automatically leads us to a definition for the likelihood. How? Remember that the normal distribution is parameterized completely by its mean and standard deviation. And suppose what we want is, once again, as before, we want a way of getting probability of data given a hypothesis. And this time our hypothesis is a function that takes examples x to a number y. And in particular, we don't care about any data, we care about a particular example, let's say xy. Probability of this function is basically, remember that it's the only thing that changes. If there was no noise, then this is an easy probability because it's basically it's deterministic. Noise is what gives you different answers for the same input. So this probability is simply the Gaussian, where the mean is h. We are asking how good is it possible that h is the true function? To do that, we are going to try to put h in the mean position, and look at what's the probability that the noise is what is the rest of the signal is the noise. So that is y minus h is the epsilon, the error, and this is basically a normal distribution for the error. Does it make sense? Questions? Yeah.
You said the normal distribution is parameterized by mu, and so this normal distribution is for what?
For the E.
For the E.
For the E. This data point given h and x, this data point y is completely defined by the E. Right? So because y equals, if the function was h, then yi will be h of xi plus ei. In other words, E is this expression. And I'm saying that if this was the true function, then E will be distributed normally. And I'm making an assumption that the normal has a zero mean and a standard deviation, a fixed standard deviation. So this is the story of the data. The generative model gives us a way of finding the probability of a point, an example, a data point, given a hypothesis. And the rest of the game is basically the same. So what we have is probability of one data point b given h, and we want to convert it into probability of the full data set given h. And the way we do it is to simply say that these data did, how will we do it?
Sum it up.
Sum it up. But every data point is separate. So you're given that, I'm just using D to summarize any data point. Your data set D is something like D1, D2, Dn.
So we need the PDF of the D.
Right? We need this function, that's there. That's the PDF. And I want somehow the PDF for the capital D. And I'm saying that each DI is independent. Do you want to sum it up? What does summing mean?
CDF mean?
CDF is summing.
But do we want to sum it up? How did we get, in the previous case, we had those 5 beads. Why did I get p cubed and 1 minus p squared? Why did I take the product? Independent. They are independent and identically distributed. This is a phrase, IID is a phrase that more than one person has told me takes some time to sink in at a conceptual level. Mathematically, it's rather easy. IID means if each element is drawn according to the same distribution, the probability of seeing all of them is simply the product. But I want you to go back and ruminate about what IID really means. Most of what we do here is because of that IID assumption. And it's a really strong assumption. It basically says every data point is independent. Now, very often that assumption gets broken in real life, but we try to live with it. So probability of the entire data set, probability that the entire data set is observed given this process is simply the probability that the first one is observed times the probability that the second one is observed times the third one, and so on, gives us the full product. And this is, again, because our data set is IID, or the examples are IID. But once we write something like this, now we're basically done. The only thing left is algebra. Algebra is easy, or actually it's calculus, but no, that's also easy. Because now we can start playing games about finding the best function. We want to find the best hypothesis given our data set and our model. And the way we do it is to simply look for the argmax of this expression, P of D given H. And I've just told you that P of D given H is simply the product. And I also told you that each individual element in this product is like this. So it's simply the product of a bunch of normal distributions. And we know how to solve this, right? It looks rather easy. How do we maximize this expression? Someone who's not spoken in class before. We've done this before. We've actually solved an argmax about 15 minutes ago, and we used the same trick.
Can you take the natural log of it to get rid of the exponent?
Exactly. You take the log, and that gets rid of all the nasty stuff. It simplifies this the maximization, and the only reason taking log is not a bad thing is because the natural log is an increasing function. So maxima are preserved. So I take the log, you get all this. It becomes some log of something, but these are all constants because it disappears. The only thing that I want to maximize over is the hypothesis. As far as the hypothesis is concerned, sigma and pi are constants, but pi is a constant for everyone. And the second term is the only thing that involves the hypothesis. So it's simply argmax minus of that expression. But sigma is still a constant. I can get rid of it, and argmax of negative of a function is argmin of the function. And that's way below the screen, but you can see it on that screen. So it's argmin of y minus h of x squared.
This is the error. You are minimizing the error.
Exactly. This is the error. The most likely hypothesis is also the one that minimizes the error. We've seen this before. Where have we seen this before?
The mean and square error.
Sorry?
Mean and square error.
Least mean squares. Mean square error. And in fact, if your hypothesis functions are actually linear functions parameterized by w, this is simply minimizing over all w y minus w transpose x. Now, is this fantastic or what? So we ended up at this rule earlier with some woolly intuition. I said it's a good thing to minimize squared error. Why? Because, we like minimizing squared error. But the fact is, turns out this is not just a random choice. It turns out minimizing squared error is equivalent mathematically to doing maximum likelihood using a particular noise model. So this is the first instance of how you can get to basically the same place, whether you start off with this loss minimization principle or with this Bayesian, with the idea of using Bayesian learning. You may end up at mathematically, functionally the same of learning algorithm. It's just that you might come to it in different ways. Questions about this? And yes, to complete the story, this is the probabilistic explanation for least mean squares regression.
So the question is why assuming the Gaussian distribution for the noise is a valid thing?
Good question. I'm going to give you two answers there. One, typically noise ends up being Gaussian very often.
Like everything would be normal.
Yeah, exactly. The other one, it's mathematically so convenient. It goes. I would answer it if I was not a Bayesian, and I'm not. Maybe I don't know what I am. I would argue that what we care about is trying to find the linear function that best explains the label, and that loss function has this kind of a probabilistic interpretation. The other option is to assume that the noise is Gaussian, and that's not an unreasonable explanation because of central limit here. It doesn't make too much of a difference in practice. And finally, I don't know, I'm counting maybe 2 or 3 answers there. The next answer is also that there's nothing that stops you from changing that assumption. In fact, a lot of the fun that we can have in these kinds of modeling is by changing that assumption. But to change that assumption out of the Gaussian or the binomial distribution, you need to have a good reason. This is the convenient, mathematically most easy version of the story. And if you know something else, sure, go for it. That's your modeling choice. So that's really the modeling decision here. What's the functional form of the PDF? In the 10 minutes that are left, if there are no questions, I'm going to talk about the Bayes optimal classifier, unless someone wants to interrupt me. Since I've already moved ahead, it looks like I have made the decision. So far what we've seen is what's the most probable hypothesis given a particular data set. But there's another way to think about this problem. I could ask, I really don't care about a function. I don't care what's the most probable hypothesis. I don't want a function, because at the end of this process, you'll get a single function, right? At the end of, by doing least mean squares or the MLE on that expression the example that I just gave, you get a single function, and at test time, you take that function and apply it on new examples. This is what we've been doing all the time. Alternatively, I could ask, I really don't care about any specific function. All I want is labels for my test examples, for the future examples. So instead of asking what's the most probable function given the training data, I could ask what's the most probable label to a new test point given my training data. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Are these two the same? Why?
Because if you assume that this specific function is the most probable function for labeling this specific value, it means that you are saying what is the most probable label for this value.
Not quite, it turns out. In fact,
but
yes.
if they're out of sync, I mean, if you're wrong still,
Yes.
the outcome will have different probabilities.
They are independent.
How you assume a same function for every label in the first?
In the first case, you fix the function. In the second case, given a new test point,
You don't assume that.
you don't. There is no function. You were kind of getting there. Okay, let's see if you come back to that point after, once we get through this. I'm going to argue that they're not the same. Because, in some sense, the question is, how should we use this idea of Bayesian learning? Or what should the hypothesis space be? The hypothesis space, on one hand, could be the collection of functions. That's what we've always been doing. I give you a collection of functions, and I've defined machine learning to be finding the best function for different definitions of the word best. I could argue that I really don't care about the functions, and the space that I want to search over is only the set of predictions. So I want to find the best prediction independent of what the function is, given a new test point. And it turns out these two can often be different. And intuitively, the difference comes from the first case, you select a function, and in the second case, you don't commit to any answer until the very end, and you entertain every possible output. And you weight them differently based on the example. So, to point out that these two need not be the same, let's look at a tiny little example. Remember that map estimation is search over hypothesis. Let's say we have three hypotheses, H1, H2, and H3. I don't care what the data set is, I don't care what anything is. These are the only three hypotheses in the universe. And for a particular data set, and let's assume they're all uniform. So it's not even map, it's maximum likelihood. I mean, the prior is uniform. So for some particular data set, let's say, the hypothesis H1 has a likelihood, or actually the posterior distribution over the hypothesis H1 is 0.4. The posterior over H2 is 0.3, and S3 is also 0.3. What's the map hypothesis? The maximum of posterior? H1. Everyone agrees it's H1. Well, I just asked you to find what's the one biggest of these three things. It's no surprise there. So let's play this game a little more. Let's say for the new test example, H1 of X predicts positive, H2 of X predicts negative, and H3 also predicts negative. Now, the question I want you to think about is, what's the most probable classification of X given these three posterior distributions? Who says -1 and who says +1? -1, raise your hands. +1, raise your hands. Okay, you say you're the only one, so you get to talk.
Oh, do I?
Yes.
I think H1 is the most probable hypothesis, so it decides the label.
But what's the most probable label?
But it's governed by the hypothesis, right?
Okay, that's one option. Can someone speak up for the minus side? Yeah.
There's a 0.6 probability for the minuses.
Actually, that's right. The probability of +1 given X is 0.4. The probability of -1 given X is 0.3 plus 0.3. So it turns out the most probable explanation is not the output of the maximum a posteriori hypothesis. In this case, I'm not saying this is always going to happen, but here's an example. Questions? Yeah.
So based on what you said, it seems that just the second way that we try to actually calculate the probability of the label is more accurate than finding the probability of which function would be.
That's a good intuition, in fact, and that's also a good segue for my next slide, which is actually the previous slide. The label produced by the most probable classifier is simply this expression. You sum over all hypotheses, because we don't care about the hypothesis, and you take you basically explain away the hypothesis. So it turns out that this classification is called the Bayes optimal classifier. It's a ridiculously and hopelessly impossible thing to do computationally, because you're summing over all hypotheses. Now, if your hypothesis space is a set of linear threshold units, you want to integrate over all points in the n-dimensional space for every single test example. So that's a hopeless thing, but it's a useful theoretical construct to keep in mind. And it turns out that very often you will see papers that say, we want to approximate the Bayes optimal decision, and here's a loss function that seems to do a good job. Or you'll see another approximation, which is we want to approximate the Bayes optimal decision. We know we can't sum over all hypotheses, so let me give you an approximate sum. Let me do some sampling and sum over the samples. Yeah.
So is it a good thing to first find what are the functions that have the most probability to predict the data and sum over those functions?
Exactly. That's the sampling version. But it's possible again that you might, even if you have a handful of functions that seem to have high probability, the rest of them can overwhelm these things. So while this is a theoretically useful thing to have in mind, in practice you may not always, most likely you'll never get to actually implement this, the Bayes optimal classification. Okay? Yeah.
So in this case we have a label plus and minus one, right? What if we are generating a real value and what?
You can still do that, right?
So we'll just sum up the things, that's it.
Yeah, but here the argmax would be over the real set, and then you have to do more, little bit more work. So you're no longer asking for the argmax over plus and minus, you're asking for argmax over all reals, and that is an optimization problem. So it's a nasty optimization problem because it's argmax over all y, sum over all h, that expression. Yeah.
Isn't this like weighted perceptron?
Is it like weighted perceptron?
Means there we have particular set of hypotheses, here we are doing it for all.
Actually,
The decision is given by voting.
the decision is given by consensus.
Yeah.
In fact, that's an excellent intuition because it turns out the Bayes optimal classifier is slightly cheating. Because in general, the hypothesis space entertained by the Bayes optimal. So this is also a function, right? The Bayes optimal classifier also takes a new data point and produces a label. So it is some function, right? If I consider the family of Bayes optimal classifiers, it turns out that's a richer class of functions than the hypothesis space. Like the way we did boosting. In AdaBoost, just by combining these hypotheses, you end up with a final hypothesis which is richer. And the Bayes optimal classifier has a similar kind of a property because of a reason that actually is an extension of what you just said. You're averaging effectively. You're taking expectation over all hypothesis. So I think it's given that it's 4:20 right now, I should not start naive Bayes classification. But if there are any questions, you can ask me now or you can ask me later. And I must tell you that some people typically end up feeling that this is too vague. The probabilistic intuition, if you've not been exposed to, say, a stats background, this might seem a little more painful than the other version of machine learning. So I encourage you to go over the slides and come back with questions.